Today we're going to talk about two of the most famous and iconic pour-over drippers, the Hario V60 and the Kalita Wave. If you're unsure of which one you should get, then this video is for you. Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Asa from the Coffee Chronicler, and today I'm going to help you decide between these two drippers. I'll give you my opinion on different pros and cons, and also talk a little bit about each individual model. There's a lot of different versions of the Kalita Wave today. If that sounds a little bit too basic to you, then just hang on a little bit longer, because we're also going to go into a few pretty geeky details, especially when it comes to the Kalita Wave. So you might want to hang around a little bit longer. So just a little bit of backstory. The Hario V60 got really popular around 2010. It was around that time that third wave coffee kind of like took on the shape that we know today. So for that reason, the Hario has always been closely connected with specialty coffee, or at least the third wave of coffee. Before the Hario V60 came onto the scene, pour-over coffee hadn't really been the main focus of specialty coffee. Things like espresso, French press, even regular drip had all been way more popular. There were only a few places serving pour-over coffee. Blue Bottle was one of them. They used a dripper called the Bonmark. Of course, there was also the famous Melita from Germany, but that was more seen as something people used at home, people who didn't really know anything about coffee, not something for professionals. So whenever a product becomes really popular, there will always be competitors and rivals that do the same, just a little bit different. That's how Kalita Wave came to be. So the Kalita Wave came just shortly after the Hario V60 had become really popular, and it quickly got a lot of attention, especially among very serious coffee geeks. The main reason was that the Kalita was seen as a more consistent way of brewing coffee. For some reason, the Hario got a reputation for being a little bit finicky, a little bit temperamental, and you couldn't be sure you got the same cup of coffee every time. Whereas with the Kalita Wave, consistency was a lot easier to achieve, or at least that was the idea. There are a couple of main differences between the Hario V60 and the Kalita Wave. The first one is the drain hole. So the Hario has one big hole where all the water has to go through. The Kalita Wave, on the other hand, has three smaller holes, which restrict the flow rate. Another key difference is the shape of the two brewers. So the Hario V60 has that 60-degree angle, it's a cone shape. The Kalita, on the other hand, has a flat bottom. Some people think that the flat bottom makes the brew more consistent. The idea is that all the water is in contact with the coffee the same amount of time. With the V60 you could get the impression that the coffee in the bottom of the dripper would get over-extracted, but the coffee in the top of the dripper would get under-extracted because of the shape. Personally, I don't think that's the case, and if you look into how water extracts coffee, I think there's a good argument to be made that water is a more efficient solvent when it hits the brew bed at first and doesn't have any coffee particles already, and then it gets less efficient as it draws down. So in that way it actually makes sense to have the cone shape. Another key difference between these two drippers are the filters. So as you can see, the Hario V60 has these cone-shaped filters, which I personally like, and the Kalita has these kind of wave-shaped filters here. So that's actually how it got its name, because the filters are shaped like a wave. The idea is that the wave shape will help push the brew bed and the water away from the sides of the dripper, and that will actually help with the thermal retention of the brew bed. So when you make coffee, it's important that the temperature is rather stable, and if you have a dripper that takes a lot of thermal energy, it has a lot of mass, then that could potentially be a problem. So a filter like this might help to retain the heat better. One thing to keep in mind is that it's a little bit harder to find Kalita filters. Not that many brands produce this type. Nowadays a lot more brands produce the cone-shaped filter, but I find that some of them don't have the best quality. So actually that can be a little bit tricky. One annoying thing is that Hario doesn't even produce that good filters anymore. They used to make some really good filters, but then they changed factory and the quality hasn't been the same ever since. Personally, I prefer a brand called Cafec, which makes a lot of different cone-shaped filters. They have one where they use a material called Abaca, which I find gives a really good cup and a very predictable flow rate. Okay, but now the big question, which one of these two drippers should you get? In the coffee industry, there's still this myth going on that the Kalita Wave is more consistent than the Hario V60, and to be honest, I just don't think it's the case. A while ago, I did an article that you can read, I'll put a link down in the description, about the Kalita Waves, and it turns out that the flow rate is pretty different between the various models. So for instance, the glass and ceramic version are a lot faster than the steel version I got here. And the stainless steel version is probably the most widespread Kalita Wave, so that's something to keep in mind. So if you read a recipe somewhere, you can't be sure if it's made for the ceramic version or the stainless steel version, and they will act pretty differently. Another common complaint with the Kalita Wave is that the filters tend to clog the drain holes. So the reason this happens is because the stainless steel version, the ribs in the bottom don't do a very good job of pushing the filter away from the holes. If you look at the ceramic version of the Kalita Wave, it has a lot more protruding ribs, and the same goes for the glass version. It has a bit of a different design, but it does a better job of keeping the filter away from the bottom. With the stainless steel version, it's very easy for the filter to get dragged all the way down, and once it blocks one of the drain holes, it completely changes the game. A nice little hack that I've been using is to add a dispersion screen to the bottom of the brewer, and that helps make it more consistent. It will lift up the filter and avoid the clogging issue. So is the Kalita Wave really more consistent than the Hario V60? Well, if we're talking about the glass, the ceramic version, I think it might be. But if we're talking about the stainless steel version, not at all. And as I mentioned, the stainless steel version is still the most widespread Kalita. I would argue with the Hario V60, you know what to expect and you're gonna get it. If you choose the ceramic or the plastic or one of the metal versions, the difference is not gonna be massive. But all this doesn't really help you that much with which one you should get. I think that both of these brewers can make really good coffee, but they do have a little bit of a different flavor profile. I feel with the Hario, you get more aftertaste, you get a bit more of a sharp acidity, and you get some interesting texture. With the Kalita Wave, you get more of a uniform clarity, you get more transparency, and you get a more elegant cup. A little comparison I like to make between these drippers is to speakers. So some speakers have a lot of bass, treble, they're fun sounding, maybe they're not representing reality that well, but you enjoy the music on them. Then there are speakers that are more neutral, they're more balanced, you can really hear all instruments, and you can appreciate maybe classical music a lot better. I think the Kalita Wave is that neutral kind of speaker, whereas the Hario is more fun sounding. If you're a beginner, I think you'll get better results, more interesting results with the Hario V60. You can get really good and interesting results even though you don't have the best grinder, maybe your technique is a little bit wobbly. Whereas with the Kalita Wave, you really need to know what you're doing. I think for a beginner, the Hario V60 is really the perfect one to start with. And once you've gotten a bit more experience, you know more about coffee, different beans, different brewing styles, then you can graduate to the Kalita Wave. Personally, I like to brew with the plastic V60 simply because it's sturdy, you can drop it on the floor and it will survive. But if you prefer one of the other versions, I can't see any reasons why you shouldn't go for it. Just remember that they do need a little bit more preheating compared to the plastic version. With the Kalita Wave, it's a little bit more difficult. I like to brew on the glass version, but it's extremely fragile. For that reason, I recommend people getting the ceramic version. It will need a bit more preheating, but you can get really good coffee with it. Okay guys, that's it for today. Thumbs up if you liked the video and consider subscribing if you loved it. Let me know down in the comment section which one of the two is your favorite. Do you also think that the V60 is better for beginners and the Kalita Wave is more for advanced brewers? Have you had any stalling issues with the stainless steel version? That's it. See you next time.